Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. An extraordinary day on Capitol Hill with the fourth in a series of public hearings for the January 6th Select Committee. This one focused on the pressure campaign by Donald Trump and his allies on officials in key states, a campaign that was critical in Trump's attempts to seize power for himself, and one that, despite multiple warnings that his rhetoric could lead to violence, Donald Trump pursued anyway. As Trump attorney Cleta Mitchell told the committee, the plot to get state legislators to overturn the election results may have been in the works even before Election Day, and it was a multi-pronged effort that included daily voicemails from the likes of Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, campaign ads and street protests, and screeds on right-wing media intended to intimidate lawmakers. Watch.
If we have to, we're going to go to homes and we're going to let them know what we think about them.
There were multiple protests. I actually don't remember the exact number. There was at least 3, I think, outside either my district office or my home. And you're correct. My son, my then 15-year-old son, was home by himself for the first one. All of my personal information was doxed online. It was my personal email, my personal cell phone, my home phone number. In fact, we had to disconnect our home phone for about 3 days because it would ring all hours of the night and would fill up with messages.
Brian Cutler, we're outside.
Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers was a key witness at today's hearing. He outlined the pressure he faced from Trump aides and the ex-president himself to peddle the big lie, even as Team Trump admitted they didn't have any evidence.
He said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. And I don't know if that was a gaffe or maybe he didn't think through what he said, but both myself and others in my group, the 3 in my group and my council, both remembered that specifically, and afterwards we kind of laughed about it.
But a major focus of today's hearing, the plot by the Trump campaign to arrange alternate slates of electors for Donald Trump, a plan that White House officials were warned could be illegal.
To be clear, did you hear the White House counsel's office say that this plan to have alternate electors meet and cast votes for Donald Trump in states that he had lost was not legally sound?
Yes, sir.
And who was present for that meeting that you remember?
It was in our office. It was Mr. Meadows, Mr. Giuliani, and a few of Mr. Giuliani's associates.
The Select Committee interviewed several of the individual fake electors, as well as Trump campaign staff who helped organize the effort.
We were just, kind of useful idiots or rubes at that point. A strong part of me really feels that it's just kind of as the road continued and as it was failure, that got formulated as what do we have on the table. Let's just do it.
The hearing also featured prominently 2 Georgia election officials, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who testified that White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows texted or called him 18 times to set up the now infamous January 2nd, 2021 phone call between Raffensperger and Donald Trump and his attorneys, as well as Gabriel Sterling, who debunked point by point by point the fraud claims Trump made on that infamous January 2nd phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, as well as Shay Moss. She's an elections worker in Fulton County who found herself at the center of a completely baseless allegation, amplified by one Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, among others. Here's what she said about the threat she faced for just doing her job.
I just felt bad for my mom, and I felt horrible for picking this job and being the one that always wants to help and always there. And never missing out one election. I just felt like it was my fault for putting my family in this situation.
Joining us now, Congresswoman Elaine Luria of Virginia. She is a member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. I have a million questions, but I want to start with what you and the committee wanted us to take from today's incredibly emotional, compelling testimony from these witnesses.
Well, thank you. I think that there were 2 pieces of it. I think one was the factual basis, what calls were made, what pressure was made, and what attempts were made to create these plots of fake electors to send them to Washington. But the other side of it was this personal story, the personal toll that it took on elected officials, that it took on individuals like Ms. Shaye Moss, who works as a dedicated election official for over a decade, on her mother, her grandmother, the personal impact of this. And there are just thousands of people like Ms. Moss across the country who've been impacted by these lies and this pressure.
Yeah, I mean, bringing to life the reality for an election worker whose child was home alone when Trump's supporters, mobs of supporters, descended on their homes, really did, I think, refocus everyone on what this climate was like for election workers. But there's a through line. I mean, we asked Congressman Pete Aguilar after the last hearing if the president's indifference to hang Mike Pence was about an intended consequence or an indifference to violence. And I have the same question about showcasing all the violence put into motion by Donald Trump's words and deeds and lack of deeds by never condemning the violence. What is your sense on the violence that Trump instigates as a theme in these public hearings?
I think it's that human element of the human toll and sort of the visceral nature of the violence. I mean, we're familiar with the violence that happened here at the Capitol on January 6th. We've seen that video so many times. And I think many of us were loosely aware of, leading up to that, between the election and January 6th, that these types of demonstrations got out of hand at state capitals around the country. But when we saw the footage today of the same man who infamously was on the Senate floor wearing Viking horns in the same costume getup, really carrying forth the same actions, it looked to me like a rehearsal. I knew that this had been building and had been repeated around the country many times, but I think, through the work of the committee and seeing just how much all of these pieces lined up, the pressure in the states, it culminated in the pressure here at the Capitol and the pressure on Mike Pence that we described at the previous hearing.
The fake electors plot doesn't get as much airtime as the ellipse speech or Rudy Giuliani's combat by trial, but it may very well, by the committee's storytelling, represent the illegal conspiracy that directly involves Donald Trump. And I wonder if you can speak to your first point about laying out the facts of an illegal plot to overturn the election. Speaker Rusty Bowers was incredibly powerful for what he said and what he didn't say. I mean, he said there was no evidence ever provided, and he made clear they wanted him to overturn, to decertify. He started to say overturn and then changed his word choice to decertify. There was no drama in his recitation of the facts, that the facts clearly prove that the Trump campaign knew that there wasn't fraud in Arizona and they wanted a fake slate submitted anyway.
That was clear, and his testimony was so compelling in that. And he kept asking the questions. He's somebody who's truly is a public servant, and you could tell his dedication by his words, and it is so deep as to his faith rests on that obligation that he has to the oath. And, he kept being told, well, we need you to do this. And he kept saying, well, show me the facts. Where are the lists of these names of people, who are not citizens, people who are deceased? And he keeps asking over and over again, and they never produce anything. Yet they keep calling these meetings, bringing in more people, and eventually they get enough people to create these documents of these fake slates of electors. But they don't succeed in actually, getting Mr. Bowers, for example, leadership in the state house to call a special session. He doesn't have the authority to do that, but they just keep telling him and others, this is replicated around the country, that they have this authority to just reject results, call sessions in state legislatures, kind of depending on the state and the circumstances, just essentially telling them, just figure out a way to break the law so you can send us what we want, is the result that really came out of that.
And it involved Donald Trump. I want to play some of the part of the testimony that you and I are talking about.
To quote the former president, during the conversation, he told me the election was rigged and that I won Arizona, unquote. Did you have such a conversation with the president?
I did have a conversation with the president. That certainly isn't it, but there were parts of it that are true. But there are parts that are not, sir.
And the part that I read you, is that false?
Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
Speaker Bowers, did the president call you again in later in December?
He did, sir.
And did you tell the president in that second call that you supported him, that you voted for him, but that you were not going to do anything illegal for him?
I did, sir.
Nevertheless, his lawyer, John Eastman, called you some days later on June 4th, 2021. And he did have a very specific ask that would have required you to do just what you had already told the president you wouldn't do, something that would violate your oath. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I said, you're asking me to do something that's never been done in history, the history of the United States. And I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof. And that's going to be good enough with me? That I would put us through that, my state, that I swore to uphold both in Constitution and in law? No, sir. He said, well, that's my suggestion would be just do it and let the courts figure it all out.
This testimony feels like the other half of the coin from federal Judge Carter's ability to assert that John Eastman and Donald Trump likely committed felonies. I mean, this is witness testimony from a lifelong Republican who's basically testifying that the president knowingly asked him to break the law, knowing the plot was illegal. Tell me the importance in terms of questions that are swirling in the arena of public opinion about Trump's criminality.
Well, I think that this was incredibly compelling and moving, and the fact that we heard from the former president today through his own words, the pressure that he put on Secretary Raffensperger, the account of the calls that he had with Mr. Bowers. It really was, hearing directly what the president said, who he said it to, and what kind of pressure was applied. And again, like we've seen, people stand up and do the right thing, not cave to that pressure, say, I'm going to follow the laws of this state and of our nation, and we're not going to throw out the electors or the popular vote of our state. We're not going to take these fake slates of electors. And today, just even more people implicated in this. We have a member of Congress, a senator, others, who were cited by our witnesses as having participated in this plot.
The evidence that was provided today that was perhaps most, for those of us who follow this every day, there are a ton of questions about who Donald Trump was talking about, right? When he tells acting AG Rosen and Deputy acting AG Donahue, leave the rest to my R account, basically the R's in Congress. We got one of the names of those R's that Donald Trump had in mind when he asked DOJ to declare the election corrupt, and that was Ron Johnson. Tell me the significance of that anecdote and that testimony.
Well, it clearly shows that there were others who were cooperating with the president and people close to him to carry out this plot. And essentially, we've got to get these slates of fake electors delivered to the former vice president, who is acting as, the president of the Senate, so that, he will consider them and use them in this plan that we're pressuring him to carry out. So, I think it's one glimpse into perhaps a bigger picture of the large number of, people who were involved in trying to carry this out. So, I think was very, very telling that we heard that directly from a witness.
Is there any doubt in your mind that Donald Trump directed or participated in a conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding of Congress?
There is no doubt in my mind. We've laid this out in multiple ways, and I had read the testimony of some of these witnesses, but hearing them today, and for example, seeing Speaker Bowers' conviction and the way he delivered his testimony, it reinforced to me that the former president, he tried to use his office in this fake plan scheme, all of this, many levers, many people around the country in these swing states to try to corrupt the results of the election, to deliver these slates of fake electors, to pressure the former vice president, and to change the outcome of an election to something different than what the American people voted for. So
All of your, not all, but many of your witnesses have been lifelong Republicans who voted for Donald Trump, and at least in today and last week, some of them were the closest people to Donald Trump, including Bill Barr, Bill Stepien, his campaign manager. I think today was the first time we've seen any bit of Cassidy Hutchinson, special assistant to the president and an advisor to Mark Meadows. I wonder if those voices will include former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, either in live or taped testimony.
Well, I can't comment specifically about who is going to appear at future hearings, but you did hear the appeal at the end by the Vice Chair, Liz Cheney, that Mr. Cipollone's testimony to the committee is very important. And so we will, see as time moves on who appears before these hearings.
Congresswoman Elaine Luria, I know these are intense days, and we appreciate you for taking some time to talk to us about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Joining our coverage, Jackie Alemany, Washington Post congressional investigations reporter, also an MSNBC contributor. Betsy Woodruff-Swan is back, national correspondent for Politico, also an MSNBC contributor. Miles Taylor's here, former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security. He's now the co-founder and executive director of the Renew America movement. And our friend Jason Johnson's back, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, also an MSNBC political contributor. I want to start with the reporters. What was new that is added into what we all now know? You first, Jackie.
Yeah, Nicole, there's a few things that were new. There was the name drop of Congressman Andy Biggs, that he called Rusty Bowers the morning of January 6th, I believe it was, and directly pressured him and asked him to go along with the alternate scheme of electors, which Rusty Bowers declined to do. And then there was also the direct link between this plot to submit a phony slate of electors and the former president via Ronna McDaniel, the RNC head. She testified to investigators behind closed doors in video that was played during the hearing that the president called her. She picked up the phone and he said, "Hold on one sec, Ronna," and put on John Eastman, who then walked McDaniel through the legal coup he had drafted, essentially asking for the RNC's support, though McDaniel was quick to clarify that she viewed the RNC's role as a supporting role and not necessarily as the mechanism or operation that would be executing Eastman's ideas.
Such a good thing to flag. Let me play some of Eastman's appeal to the Georgia legislature on the elector scheme. For my control room, it's number 5.
You could also do what the Florida legislature was prepared to do, which is to adopt a slate of electors yourself. And when you add in the mix of the significant statistical anomalies and sworn affidavits and video evidence of outright election fraud, I don't think it's just your authority to do that, but quite frankly, I think you have a duty to do that, to protect the integrity of the election here in Georgia.
So we now know, Betsy Woodruff-Swan, that upon examining just some of the committee's evidence, a federal judge thinks that John Eastman, more likely than not, committed felonies. Hearing that was more ominous with that analysis in the public record, in the judicial record. I wonder your thoughts tying not just Eastman, but Trump to, the phony elector scheme wasn't some madcap circus-like thing. It was a crime. It is a crime to submit fraudulent electors who do not represent the will of the votes in any said state. What did you make of the recitation and almost the repetitive nature of witness testimony, proving that it wasn't just Rudy, wasn't just Cleta Mitchell, Eastman was involved, Trump was involved, Rudy was involved, up and down the White House and campaign operation. They had their hands on this conspiracy to submit fraudulent electors.
Yeah, there's so much that's notable about this particular wonky but really important piece of the Trump campaign's effort to overturn the election. Robert Sinners emerging as a new voice, or a larger voice, in this committee hearing, I thought was particularly notable. We've heard from all sorts of people who observed the president's scheme, who were witnesses. Sinners is distinctive because he presents himself as somebody who was actually involved, who was swept up, carried along, part of the insanity, frankly, that was playing out on the part of the president's team. And he also has presented this image of how it got to the point where people working for Trump were essentially just throwing spaghetti noodles against the wall, saying, is this something we could do? Let's do it, without thought as to legality, propriety, or the Constitution. So that I thought was a really striking voice to hear on this topic. Of course, there's also Cassidy Hutchinson saying that the White House counsel's office itself said that this scheme was not legally sound, and it wasn't something that the president's team should be doing. You had presidential campaign lawyers distancing from themselves from this scheme, trying to suggest that they basically passed the baton to Rudy and didn't want to be involved. I mean, so many people who saw what was going on and knew it was wrong, and clearly Trump's decision was, rather than listening to people he trusted, people he had relationships with, people he'd known for years, instead he chose to listen to whoever was telling him what he wanted to hear. That's the through line that connects all of this, and it really was crystallized in this hearing in a significant way.
Let me play some more of the testimony. This is number 6. This is the Pennsylvania House Speaker, Brian Cutler, on his calls from Rudy Giuliani.
Another legislator, Pennsylvania House Speaker Brian Cutler, received daily voicemails from Trump's lawyers in the last week of November.
Mr. Speaker, this is Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis. We're calling you together because we'd like to discuss, obviously, the election.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. This is Jenna Ellis, and I'm here with Mayor Giuliani.
Hey, Brian, it's Rudy. I really have something important to call to your attention that I think really changes things.
Cutler felt that the outreach was inappropriate and asked his lawyers to tell Rudy Giuliani to stop calling, but Giuliani continued to reach out.
I understand that you don't want to talk to me now. I just want to bring some facts to your attention and talk to you as a fellow Republican.
So, Miles, what followed this evidence that they entered was Steve Bannon sending protest is a generous word, the mob to his house. I mean, the violence that was incited by Donald Trump was part of a series of violence directed at election officials and local Republican officials who refused to overturn the results of the election. But it commenced well before January 6th.
Yeah, we learned today, Nicolle, yet again, that this plot to overturn the election was premeditated, it was multifaceted, and as you noted, it was violent. On the premeditated side, the committee showed very clearly that there was documentation, there was planning, there were legal rationales. This was a well thought through 7-stage process. On the multifaceted piece, we saw that today. We saw that with the discussion of fake electors, Trump's effort to find fake votes to win. And also we've seen that in recent weeks with the conversation about fake authorities for the vice president or these state and local officials to overturn the election. It had many, many prongs. But importantly, this was also violent. This wasn't just political maneuvering. This was very much mafia-like tactics that were used as a last resort to pressure people to undertake the actions that it was clear to the White House, state and local officials, as well as federal officials, up to and including the vice president, were unwilling to undertake. And so they sort of dispensed with the legal rhetoric. They dispensed with the exhortations to duty. They dispensed with conversations like Rudy just left in that voicemail, hey, maybe you should do this because we're fellow Republicans, and ultimately just resorted to mob-like violent intimidation. And we saw that with election workers. We saw that with members of Congress. We saw that, of course, culminating in a violent insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. This should be especially concerning in addition to all of the other laws that look like they may have been violated as part of this scheme. There needs to be a very specific review of the criminal behavior that was geared towards physical violence and threats towards some of these individuals, which were extensive.
Jason, I want to play Ruby Freeman's testimony because I think the mob comparison is good, but the reality is that what these people experienced was nothing short of being terrorized. Let me play that.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one. But he targeted me, Lady Ruby, a small business owner, a mother, a proud American citizen who stand up to help Fulton County run an election in the middle of the pandemic.
Jason Johnson.
I don't like engaging what I call performative blackness, right? The whole hagiography of what black folk are supposed to do in politics and how we're supposed to pray and sing and dance in order to elicit certain type of sympathy. But the level of rage that I and people that I know had when we saw this testimony is beyond anything I've probably experienced since George Floyd. That's my grandmother. That is literally the kind of work that my grandmother used to do in Newark, New Jersey. Registering people to vote, taking seniors in buses to go here and there, getting young people registered to vote. The level of violence that the Republican organization engages in against black people on a regular basis should make everything that happens in this trial pale in comparison. This is what they do. This is what they do. This is why Randy Bowman and Raffles, this is why I don't care about them getting threatening calls. Because you know what happens to them? They go back to their offices and they get security. You know what happens to people on the Supreme Court when they get threatened? They get security paid for by the Senate, but not regular black people who are just doing their jobs. Not people who have lost their name, the ability to go to the grocery store, the ability to just live their regular lives, for having the audacity to stand against the white nationalist coup that masquerades as the Republican Party. What angers me so much, honestly, Nicolle, about that testimony is that I know that those women are going to get additional threats because they were brave enough to get on television and talk about what happened. And I also know that the party that is putting these hearings together is going to do little or nothing to keep those people safe when we face this again this fall. This was the most infuriating part of these hearings that I've ever seen. Every single one of these people should be in jail, and if they're not, it is an absolute abdication of responsibility by this committee, by Merrick Garland, all the way up into the White House.
Jason Johnson, we've had a lot of conversations, but maybe none like this one. I'm going to need you to say more.
The way that Donald Trump has sort of weaponized his own bigotry, right? There was a guy who I talked to in the summer of 2020 named Nathan Calloway. Columbus, Ohio, who was like providing medical aid during a Black Lives Matter protest. And Trump put him in a tweet, and people chased him around. And here we are 2 or 3 years later. How many different people does Donald Trump and his cronies have to attack, have to threaten before we recognize that the man is a terrorist and everybody who works with him is a terrorist and Rudy Giuliani is a terrorist? This is not political activity. This is not passion. And I don't want to hear anything about the braveness of Bowman or Raffensperger or whatever. You know what? Because those guys engage in the very same voter suppression policies that led to people feeling emboldened enough that they could threaten black women like that. Let's look at what Raffensperger has done in Georgia. Let's look at how many times he's worked with the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Look at how many times he's gone after the New Georgia Project. This is what they do. So I don't care about them standing in front and saying, oh my gosh, for the first time in my life, I am the subject of the same kind of violence that I've been using the state apparatus to put against black people for the last 35 years. And this will be the norm, Nicolle. This will be the norm for every other election, as long as we actually have them going forward, if this committee and the Justice Department doesn't get serious about this. Do you think, see, we watch this stuff and we're disgusted right now. And I'm angry, and I'm getting text messages from people. We're angry and disgusted. You know, right now, people in Georgia are emboldened by this. They see these black women crying, and they love it. They love that kind of pain. They love that kind of oppression. What do you think these people have been doing it for? Because they want to move us back to the America where you could treat black people like this all the time. And every single time you have a hearing like this and nobody goes to jail and nobody gets perp walked and nobody's in an orange jumpsuit, they think we can do this again. And next time there won't be any guardrails. We have to do something about this.
Yeah,
and simply complaining about it is not enough.
I mean, so Jason, I played this yesterday. Congressman Clyburn elevated a question I've been asking all the time. We only analyze Merrick Garland. What if he does or doesn't indict Donald Trump? What's the precedent of investigating, your current boss's predecessor who's in the other party? It seems to me that the whole calculation has shifted. With all of this evidence of criminality, and not just crimes of passion, but crimes of months-long conspiracy. I mean, the committee is presenting evidence of a months-long conspiracy directed by Donald Trump, quarterbacked by John Eastman, implemented by Rudy Giuliani, with his campaign apparatus kind of jumping on and off the bus like one of those, open-top tour buses to participate in various aspects of it, that went on for many, many months. And I wonder your thoughts on Congressman Clyburn's analysis that what he's hearing on the ground from constituents all across the country is anger that it appears that Donald Trump is above the law.
Not only that Donald Trump is above the law. Look, this conspiracy is huge now, right? We've got more. More member of this conspiracy than Herschel Walker's got kids, right? Like every single week, we're finding out somebody else was involved in this process, and nobody seems to be getting in trouble. And what you have happening with a lot of voters, and not just African American voters, but I'm saying Nicolle voters in general, is when you see lawlessness and you see people not being held accountable, it makes you frustrated with the process. It makes you think, well, why should I bother to do with anything? From January 6th to this, you see these people engaging in this behavior and like, well, if they're not going to be held accountable, why do I believe this government will protect me? If they're not going to be held accountable, why do I want to wait in line 6.5 hours for this to be done? I understand what the congressman is saying, because he is not just speaking about his constituents. This is what I hear, Nicolle, from my students, from my parents, from my friends, from everybody who doesn't do this every day for a living. They look at this and they say, if I engage in a conspiracy like this to steal money from the local PTA, I'd be in jail. So how the hell can people trying to steal the whole government not be facing any consequences except for a tough hearing, half of which they decide they don't even want to show up?
Yeah, I mean, Miles, I want to come to you both on these questions of violence. I mean, this is normalized isn't strong enough. This is being operationalized on the right, this tactic of mob protests. And I wanted to clip that Bannon soundbite about how horrific it is, because it's horrific to do it to anybody. But as Jason said, the winners and losers are chosen in terms of who we protect. We should protect everybody. And frankly, if we healed the sickness of our politics, there wouldn't be incitements to violence. But Donald Trump's incitements to violence are ongoing. The Thursday of the first public hearing, he described the insurrection as the greatest moment in the MAGA movement. Not only has he not condemned any of the acts of his supporters, he continues to be enthusiastic about them.
Yeah, what did he say the day of, Nicolle? We love you and remember this day forever, something along those lines. Those messages aren't lost on the millions of people that are following Donald Trump. And you just mentioned Bannon. I don't know if I should admit this, but occasionally I listen to Bannon's podcast, The War Room, to understand what he is saying to these audiences. He calls the younger generation of people that follow him his assassins. Right. He doesn't call them his acolytes or his lieutenants or the digital guy. He calls them his assassins. They are thinking about politics as violence. That has become institutionalized in the Republican Party now. And, I was just talking the other day to a Republican congressman that quit the party and left during Donald Trump's rise. And just the other week, he was given a speech in the Midwest to a couple hundred people, largely Republican audience. And he went in worried that, maybe a fourth of the audience would say that the election was stolen. But he wanted to get a sense. And he asked the question to the crowd, how many of you think the election was stolen from Donald Trump? And he said almost 100% of the audience raised their hands. He asked a second question, how many of you think that the January 6th insurrection was a peaceful protest? Again, almost 100% raised their hands. We are not talking about rare instances of criminality. We are talking about the masses being brainwashed around this rhetoric that's being used for violence. What Jason just mentioned about the election worker, I agree, was an extremely powerful scene, and it's just the tiniest tip of an iceberg. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of unreported stories across this country of political intimidation that is exploding in our civic lives at the moment.
Everyone is sticking around. We have much more to come here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
If the most powerful person in the world can bring the full weight of the presidency down on an ordinary citizen who is merely doing her job with a lie as big and heavy as a mountain, who among us is safe? None of us is. None of us.
If you have Graves' disease, your eye symptoms. unless they screw everything up.
Rated PG, only in theaters July 1st.
The president's lie was and is a dangerous cancer on the body politic. If you can convince Americans that they cannot trust their own elections, that any time they lose it is somehow illegitimate, then what is left but violence to determine who should govern?
Those were the twin pillars of today's testimony and the through line for all the witnesses and all the taped depositions we heard from today. We're back with Jackie Alemany, Betsy Woodruff-Swan, Miles Taylor, and Jason Johnson. Jackie Alemany, the conspiracy to sow distrust in the election has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Whether or not there are criminal acts that can be proven to a jury, I suppose as a society we're still debating that. Merrick Garland doesn't seem to have moved to indict anybody. But in terms of this committee, by the fourth hearing, proving beyond any reasonable doubt that there was a conspiracy to sow distrust over any result other than Donald Trump's win, case closed.
Yeah, and I think that the committee is going even beyond that, and I think this gives me your question gives me the chance to re-answer really the first question that you asked me about what stood out as the most new to me and the most shocking, and that is this story of the way Trump's actions have caused this pervasive political violence at the very foundational aspects of our democracy. And my immediate response to you was obviously about some of the specifics that do prove criminality and provide that arc of the prosecutorial narrative that we're seeing the committee really go after. But more importantly, I think, and more important to the committee's mandate to actually change minds, is the personal narrative they were able to communicate today. And at the end of the day, yes, the stories of Rusty Bowers and Brad Raffensperger's were really powerful and moving. Brad Raffensperger's daughter-in-law, who was a widow, her house getting broken into as a result of Trump's threats, and Rusty Bowers is basically dealing with death threats while his daughter was on her deathbed. That is moving stuff, but as Jason said, at the end of the day, they do enjoy a security detail, and it's people like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss who keep our democracy turning at the very basic level. And without people like them, it doesn't matter if there was no one to stop the legal coup that Donald Trump and John Eastman were trying to implement. And these actions cause a chilling effect going forward. And that's what you're seeing the committee try to prove, and why I think it's so important that Merrick Garland ultimately actually do something with this roadmap that the January 6th committee is laying out. Because as Shay testified, there's not one election worker who she worked with that she saw in those videos that were played before the American public who still works in the Fulton County elections office. And that chilling effect is really problematic going into 2024 and future elections.
It's amazing how quickly it happened, too. I mean, it's such a good point that dismantling the democracy had tentacles in, of course, yes, overturning his defeat, but also in making sure that there are no more Ruby Freemans that work in our elections, that don't administer an election in a precinct, so that it falls apart either way. And I wonder, Betsy, as you cover, the number of witnesses that this committee is able to showcase, not just in live testimony, but I keep asking them how many hours of tape depots they have, and they say lots. There are clearly lots of hours and lots of witnesses. Everyone tells the same story of Donald Trump's premeditated and knowingly illegal conduct in terms of submitting fake electors, in terms of getting Mike Pence to do something he was told was illegal, the Eastman plan, and in terms of all of the asks that went out to local election officials to overturn the will of the vote in their states.
Right. Obviously, the governing question that shaped the decisions that Trump and his lawyers made in those final weeks was, what could we do that would keep us in power? What steps do we have left that could possibly extend Trump's presidency longer than it has been. And that was kind of the end all be all only question that really mattered in terms of the decisions that these people made, even to the point, as the audio you played earlier shows, of harassing state level officials, of getting people like Andy Biggs to call state level officials on the morning of January 6th to urge them to participate in this ridiculous and unlawful plot to reverse the election outcome. The extent to which it was just spaghetti noodles against the wall is something that shows up at every turn in this hearing, particularly today, especially when you have Rusty Bowers talking about Rudy Giuliani claiming that they had theories but not evidence, kind of saying the quiet part out loud. But of course, what we have to remember is that this theory and what the committee captured today, by far in the most powerful way possible, is that these conspiracy theories did real damage and put people in the real world in grave physical danger. These questions of threats against election workers are a major priority at the Justice Department. They set up a task force several months back focused on threats to election workers, but thus far there's not a ton of clarity in terms of how many people are working on that task force, how many investigations do they have open. They've brought some federal cases, but it's not a huge number, and it certainly isn't something that gets the splashy attention that their work going after January 6th insurrectionists gets. It's something I've been asking the department about over the last several weeks. It's a really important issue. How well resourced are these federal government efforts to go after the kind of people who are harassing women like Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman? And I think one of the most obvious outstanding questions from this hearing is what happened to the people who broke into the home of Shay Moss's grandmother? Breaking into people's houses is illegal. You're not allowed to walk in just because they open the door when you knock, even if you say you're trying to engage in some sort of nonsensical citizen's arrest. If there hasn't been accountability for those people, that's something that would be shocking. And it's just so important to have people running elections that they can know that their family members won't have their homes invaded because they simply do their jobs.
You know, Miles, we talk about the moving goalposts on the right and all the people that laundered Donald Trump along the way, all the editorial pages in America that laundered him along the way. But he was always the same. I mean, Michael Cohen testified to how he ran his business, people that were inside the attempted extortion of Zelensky. He was the same way. We'll withhold military aid if you don't dirty up the Biden family. I mean, he has always been the same. What does it say about one of the two political parties, the one you and I were once in, that they have permitted this, they have enabled this? And I'm not aware of very many people coming out today and going before the cameras, certainly no one asked to be on this program, to condemn the conduct described in sworn testimony today.
Well, Nicolle, it's because they make the mistake of thinking someone like a Donald Trump is an aberration that they can temporarily take advantage of, and it will go away. And I continue to have conversations with Republican congressmen who are there now, who are still friends, and I ask them that question, you know, why are you going along with this? And the answer is typically, well, look, I'm one of the not crazy guys, and I've got to stay in there to steady the ship. At some point, that just stops working when you realize a crazy man has taken over the ship and deputized everyone on it to work for him. At some point, you got to get off that ship. But it was, to your point, very clear who Donald Trump was from day one. All of us in the Republican Party knew who he was. So many people didn't want him to get the nomination, certainly didn't think he would get elected. But when they did, just kind of willingly walked along with it. Look, I think the violence here is really, really the sort of crux of all of it. My friend Alex Vindman always says that there's so many people that are still silent because the intimidation actually works. And we've seen this before in democratic societies. Political intimidation leading to political violence, God forbid, leading to political assassinations. You know where we've seen it? We've seen it in the Weimar Republic in Germany before the rise of Hitler. It's not hyperbole to draw those comparisons because we saw very similar behavior happening that was founded on, guess what? On a big lie, on a big political lie that led to that type of violence. I worry especially about the Republicans retaking the House and the Senate in the fall and potentially the return of Donald Trump because he is going to be on a vindictiveness tour, on a revenge tour against his political opponents. We have seen it before in history. We need to be guarded against it now.
Up next for us, the Michigan Secretary of State who faced what we're talking about, threats of violence herself. Some of that was played in today's hearing. More on that is next for us. Don't go anywhere.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal! You're a threat to democracy!
Whenever heartburn strikes, get fast relief with Tums. It's time to love food back.
When Alaska Airlines needed a partner for the complex operations of travel, they made the switch to T-Mobile. Our 5G has Alaska Airlines and their customers covered, from major hubs to remote destinations. With 5G coverage ready now for the demands of today and the future. T-Mobile's network powers Alaska Airlines as they deliver next-level...
My home, and my stomach sunk, and I thought, it's me. And then it's just, we don't know what's going to, the uncertainty of that was the fear. Like, are they coming with guns? Are they going to attack my house? I'm in here with my kid, I'm trying to put him to bed. And so it was, that was the scariest moment, just not knowing what was going to happen.
Joining us now, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Madam Secretary, you've been one of the sort of clearest and most fact-based witnesses to the attacks on democracy, really since the election. And I wonder how seeing this other side of your experience of holding up democracy in your state in terms of the terror that was eked out against you and your family felt for you today.
It was tough. It was tough. It was tough hearing that audio again. It was tough seeing the video. And it was tough knowing that it's not over, that this is, you could watch this hearing saying, oh, this has happened. This was about a past election, but it's not. This is a live battle that we're in the midst of fighting. And so it's that uncertainty that I talked about is still there. That anxiety still exists. And I don't know yet when we will be out of this moment, but we certainly heard the depths of which many of us have been, dealing with challenges over the last few years and how far it's gone.
When I see, sitting in my chair, right, we cover the epidemic of gun violence in the United States of America, including mass shootings, and we cover the heinous frequency with which violence is threatened. Do you ever think it's not worth it?
No, I don't. I signed up for this, and as you heard from Shay's testimony today, the work of election officials, we're proud to do this work, and we know that all that stands in between us and losing our democracy are people. That's what we heard today, that if we give up, then those trying to dismantle democracy truly win. But if we multiply and if we grow in our strength, then they're defeated. And that's really what it feels like in this moment. Yes, it's challenging. But as the truth becomes known and as the challenges become clear, if people respond by joining us, by standing up for democracy, by signing up to be poll workers, we actually become stronger as a country, as a democracy. And I believe that is how we emerge out of this moment with a healthier, more robust democracy than before, by people standing up and not walking away, not giving up.
One of the parts of Donald Trump's effort to overthrow the government he ostensibly led was the fake electors conspiracy. I don't like calling it a scheme. It seems to minimize it. But he was involved, and again, in a knowingly illegal, knowingly fraudulent effort to send alternate slates. That took place in your state. Talk about, in your view, the of that evidence and testimony today.
It was clearly what was a significant piece of this effort. When the threats were real, the challenges, the false affidavits and everything else that circulated, the sham legislative hearings, all of that was real. The efforts that block the certification of our election results, but it was all about being able to submit an alternate slate of electors, people who also actually physically showed up outside our state capitol building the day we were inside certifying the actual slate of electors. And that, of course, all then culminated in what we as a nation witnessed in our Capitol on January 6th. But clearly, a key part of a nationally coordinated effort to overturn the results of a presidential election was submitting several slates of false electors from a number of battleground states like Michigan and getting then Vice President Pence or someone else to accept them as official.
And in your view, do you think enough evidence exists for Donald Trump to be under criminal investigation for his conduct?
Yeah, I think clearly when you have a candidate for office, not to mention a sitting president, calling a state's chief election officer saying, "Find me votes that don't exist." And I know there's a criminal investigation ongoing. There has to be accountability for that, because we cannot operate as a democracy if that becomes in any way an acceptable thing for anyone to do without and to escape out of without getting any culpability. Because again, all of this is about not just ensuring we as a country know the truth about what we went through in 2020, but how do we avoid it from happening again next time, potentially successfully? It's by seeking criminal culpability for those at every level who tried to nullify the will of millions of Americans to serve a political purpose.
Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, thank you so much for being part of our coverage. Jason Johnson, to you, I give the last word.
We're in danger. This is the most dire and most important time for us to pay attention to what's happening in this democracy. And I want people to understand this from today's testimony as much as we hear about these conspiracies. Imagine having to leave your home for 2 months. Imagine having to leave your job. Imagine not being able to hand out a business card. Imagine not being able to go to church, the grocery store, the movie theater, something like that, because the President of the United States identifies you in a lie, and the government that you pay taxes to isn't defending you. Brett Kavanaugh can have 30 people show up outside of his house, and the Senate spends $1 million to keep him protected. But a regular working-class black woman in Georgia has to be on the run for 2.5 months, and the FBI says, work it out on your own. This is an obligation for every single American to vote out these terrorists this fall and hold any Democrat who is not serious about removing these people from government accountable, not just as being feckless weaklings, but at this point, you're an enabler if you're not trying to remove these people from power.
Jason, is there anything about the testimony that has been a revelation to you in terms of deepening your understanding of just how premeditated and widespread the plot was?
Actually, Nicolle, no. I always assumed that this was this deep. We talked about this over a year ago. The moment that I heard a member of Congress say, I'm pretty sure I saw somebody giving people tours throughout the building, I knew this ran deep. I knew the tentacles were everywhere. And I'm so sick and tired, honestly, Nicolle. Like I said, when we talk to these, the state leader in Arizona, Secretary of State, I'm so tired of hearing these guys say, well, I'm a Republican still, but I'm so tired of stormtroopers saying I was only working on the Death Star because of the benefits, right? These people are not revealing anything other than the terrorists that they've always been.
Jackie Alamany, Betsy Woodruff Swan, Miles Taylor, and Jason Johnson, thank you all so much for spending the hour with us. We are grateful. When we come back, former Congressman, former Republican, one-time advisor to the Select Committee, our friend Denver Riggleman will be back, and he will join us right after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
If you have Graves' disease, your eye symptoms could be something more. The itchiness may just be scratching the surface. That gritty feeling may not be so cut and dry. And you need to put the pain behind your eyes front and center. Up to 50% of people with Graves' disease will develop a different condition called thyroid eye disease, which needs a different treatment. To learn more, find a TED eye specialist at isitted